RFK Jr., you said voter ID was racist. Is that true?
Maybe. I didn't see it. You know, I had a lot of positions.
It's actually a comic book written by radical Democrat RFK Jr. Argues, among other things, that voter ID laws are, quote, I kid you not, racially rancid.
Red state people are more likely to murder you, to impregnate your teenage daughter, to commit a violent crime against you, to commit a non-violent crime against you, to watch Desperate Housewives on TV, to buy pornography, to buy, degenerate video games like Grand Theft Auto.
You've called for curbing, logging, oil drilling, fracking. You wanted to eliminate it. You called it a victory for democracy. You want to curb U.S. fossil fuel extraction. Keep it in the ground, you once tweeted. You want a ban on fossil fuel extraction, a ban on fracking.
They are contemptible human beings, and that, I wish that there were a law you could punish them under.
I think the Green New Deal is, all of that stuff is important, it's good, we ought to be pursuing it. I believe that we should use market mechanisms like carbon taxes. There's going to be major disruptions, not just to humanity, but ultimately to civilization. And this is part of the cost that we're paying for our long-time deadly addiction to coal and oil.
You called the NRA once a terror group. You've supported over the years Democrats, Gore, Kerry, Obama, Hillary. You've praised Bernie Sanders multiple times. You support affirmative action.
Senator Bernie Sanders is finally endorsing Hillary Clinton today. Do you endorse her? Is she that leader?
Yeah, and I'm very close to Bernie. And a huge admirer of Bernie Sanders. My family has a long, long relationship with Joe Biden, 40 years. I have a personal friendship with him.
Do you regret endorsing Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders over the years?
I like Bernie Sanders. I voted for Barack Obama. I don't regret that. And Trump came in and said, I'm going to run the country like a business. And then he shut down 3.3 million businesses. What businessman would do that? He handed the keys to every one of our businesses in this country to Anthony Fauci.
But Bobby, and I'm sure this is going to go viral because I'm about to defend Trump. When everybody comes to you, if it's President Kennedy, and says, we need to do this right now, this is not going to last a week or 2 weeks, this is a real problem, we're going to be overwhelmed, there's only one place that makes the swabs that we need, that's what pushed Trump into that situation. And then you had the businesses closed, you had all these people out of work, you had all these other problems, they started spending money. Biden continued to spend the money, Trump wanted to spend even more. You got to give him a little bit of a break on that. The pandemic was a problem.
Here's the thing, Chris. If I were president, that would have never happened. Never, ever. When my uncle was president, when John Kennedy was president, he was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the whole world was on the edge of a nuclear war. He had 11 of the 13 top advisors, what they call the XCOM committee, telling him he needed to invade Cuba. If he had gone ahead and done that, it would have been the end of the world. We now know. So, and he said, no, he researched the issue himself. He said, show me the aerial photos. He asked the CIA, what is Khrushchev going to do? Isn't it going to make, if we go in and kill his gun crews in Cuba, isn't he going to have to come into Germany? And isn't that going to end up in a nuclear war? He asked the questions. He went granular. He did the details, and he figured out a different solution. And we need that kind of president today, and we needed it during the pandemic. And unfortunately, we got two presidents who made a series of bad choices, drove up a $16 trillion in costs, destroyed an entire generation of kids and their learning, did things that nobody in their right mind would have done during a pandemic, that violated every pandemic protocol that we've developed over 50 years. You do not shut down a country for a respiratory illness because everybody knows it's going to go through anyway, and it was an illness that spread indoors, not outdoors, and we knew that from the beginning.
Right, but they were trying to keep people from being in collections. Because remember, the people who made the protocols were also the ones telling the presidents to go this route, and it was echoed in many places all over the world. But I get the discrepancy on it. I get the discrepancy.
They were violating their own protocols, and nobody asked. You had people telling us, trust the experts. And of course, that is not a feature of science. That's not a thing. Trust the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It is a feature of religion and totalitarianism. But in democracies, we don't do that. We question everybody, and we need a president who knows that.
Final thing, what do you think of the RFK Jr. independent campaign and the Democrats' relentless attacks on him?
Well, I think he's a nice guy. I've known him. He's extremely liberal. He's more liberal than anybody. He's more liberal than the Green Party. And so I don't know. I would imagine he'd not be good for them. But you don't know how that plays out. He gets a certain, not many points, but he gets some. But they say he hurts Biden. I'm not sure that that's true. I think he probably hurts both. But he might hurt Biden a little bit more. Right. You don't know. But he's got, not a lot of points, but maybe enough points to make a difference one way or the other. But he's a very liberal guy.
A moment ago, you said you essentially see Trump and Biden as the same, different issues. But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court. It shows that he started censoring not just me. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was censoring me. No president in the country has ever done that. The greatest threat to democracy is not somebody who questions election returns, but a president of the United States who used the power of his office to force the social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to open a portal and give access to that portal to the FBI, to the CIA, to the IRS, to CISA, to NIH, to censor his political critics. President Biden, for the first president in history, to use his power over the Secret Service to deny Secret Service protection to one of his political opponents for political reasons. He's weaponizing the federal agencies. Those are really critical threats to democracy.
Donald Trump, of course, tried to overturn a free and fair election. He tried to overturn one, right? He's still fighting in court.
Yes.
How is that not a threat to democracy?
Well, I think that is a threat to democracy. If him trying to overthrow the election clearly is a threat to democracy. But the question was, who is a worse threat to democracy? And what I would say is, I'm not going to answer that question, but I can argue that President Biden is, because the First Amendment, Aaron, is the most important. Adams and Hamilton and Madison said, we put the guarantee of freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all of our other constitutional rights depend on it. If you have a government that can silence its opponents, it has license for any atrocity.
So just to be clear, you're saying you could make an argument that President Biden is a worse threat to democracy than Donald Trump. That's what you just said.
But who else has ever tried to send, what president in history has ever tried to censor political opponents? What president has weaponized the federal agency? When my father came into the Justice Department, the first week he was there, he got all of the branch and division attorneys together, and he said, whatever we do, we are not going to use the power of the Justice Department for political reasons.
Trump, of course, has said that he would do that. He has said that he would do that.
Of course, and that is reprehensible.
And he is the only president who's tried to overthrow the results of an election.
Well, let me say something about that. I'm not going to defend President Trump on that. That was appalling. And there's many things that President Trump has done that are appalling. But in 2001, we had an election stolen in this country during the Bush-Gore election. In 2004, I wrote an award-winning article for Rolling Stone that showed how that election was stolen from John Kerry. So I don't think, and most Americans agree with me about 2001, that it was a stolen election from the Democratic Party candidate. So I don't think people who say that the election is stolen, not that we shouldn't make pariahs of those people. We shouldn't demonize them. We shouldn't vilify them. What we should be doing is saying, let's all get together, Republicans and Democrats, and fix the election system so that it cannot be fixed, so that we're the exemplary democracy of the world. We ought to, Las Vegas, let me tell you this, Las Vegas is built on machines that can count and never make mistakes. Can't we make an election machine, and can't we have an electoral process that every American says whatever happens,
okay, hold on, but
it can't be fixed.
I understand that we want elections to be as perfect as they possibly can be,
Yeah.
and one should not use the fact that the election was not stolen and was not cheated to not try to perfect it. I understand that distinction, but when you do as you're doing, and you open the door to, well, we want every machine. You're opening the door to people who can say, well, then that's exactly what I'm saying. The machines miscounted, the machines did this, but they didn't. Every single analysis has shown that that did not happen, right? As you know. Do you worry that you're opening the door for people to believe this? Look at the Republican primary voters and that they believe.
I'm not worried. I don't worry about how people might misinterpret my words. What I said, I mean, and I'm careful about how I use language. Oh, I'm not saying that election was that there was cheating. I've never said that. What I've said is that there are problems, particularly, Aaron, if you don't have paper ballots. The election machines can be fixed in various ways, and that's just a fact. What we ought to have is machines, and we ought to have paper ballots at the same time, and we ought to have a very low threshold to get a recount of the paper ballots. And that just makes sense. It's common sense. But if we implement that in every jurisdiction, you're not going to have problems where Americans at each other's throats accusing
so you're
each other
talking about a
for
technical thing, like instead of having 0.5% be the trigger for a recount, you would put it even lower. I mean, that's the sort of reforms you're talking about here?
Whatever. I'm not choosing a particular threshold, but a threshold that makes sense. That's a very low threshold where you get a recount if there's some question. So, and that's, I don't think I'm saying something that's controversial. I'm saying something that I think most Americans, virtually any American, would agree with. Let's have an election system that even 10% of the Americans who are crazy people, that even they won't question, because our election system is the best election system in the world. And nobody, Vermont, for example, has a very, very good election system. Nobody ever questions the Vermont election system. And we ought to be able to do the same thing in every state. We are supposed to be the template for democracy in every country in the world. Let's make sure we put a man on the moon. We've had all these accomplishments. Let's make sure we have a system that nobody is questioning, even crazy people.
People are always going to question it, though.
Well,
they're always going to question it, and that
you want to narrow the margin of people who are questioning it to as much as possible by giving nobody any kind of legitimate claim about it. And that's all I'm saying. And what I'm saying is I'm not saying that President Trump won the election or that President Biden. And I've never said anything or suggested anything like that. All I'm saying is let's focus on the issues that bring people together, rather than constantly focusing on the polarization, on the issues that drive Americans apart and have us all at each other's throats with this very, very toxic polarization and demonization of each other.
RFK announced a running mate this week, 35-year-old from the Tech Center, seems to be very progressive. They put it mildly. To put all three of you together, it widens your lead right now. How do you view RFK and his new running mate?
Well, I've always liked him, and I've known him actually for a long time. I've liked him. He's a very liberal guy. He's probably the most liberal person in the race, including the Green Party. And so I think he's probably going to hurt Biden. I don't see him hurting me. Our people are solid. We have a very, very solid core. And I think that core is 60%.
So RFK hurts him more?
I think so, yeah. I think so. He's he's ultra liberal or ultra progressive, as they'd rather have. They don't like the word liberal anymore. You're supposed to use progressive, so therefore I'll probably use liberal. But he's a very far left person. Very, very. I think the most in the race. A lot of people were thinking, well, maybe he's going to hurt Trump. I don't see it. Once they see his record, they're going to understand how far left he is. He's a radical left person. And again, I've known him for a long time. I understand him. I like him. I get along with him. but that's his inclination. His running mate makes him look like a baby in terms of being left. She is really left, but she also has enough money from her husband that she can help him finance a campaign.
I mean, the DNC is really misbehaving. They're really trying to block people.
Yeah, they try to block you, right?
They try to block me. They try to block Trump, and I'm not a fan of Trump's, but I want to be on a level, battlefield with him. I don't want to beat him because a court threw him out. I want to beat him because I'm able to make the argument to the American people that I should be president, and I have a debate and that kind of stuff. I don't think it's good for our country. I don't think it's good for the DNC. I think this persecution that the DNC has leveled, that people see that as unfair. Americans just viscerally are saying this guy is being attacked, and it's moving huge numbers of voters over to him because they're pissed at what the DNC is doing.
Yeah.
It's also terrible for America, who are supposed to be the exemplary democracy around the world. This is what they do in banana republics.
Yeah.
You don't want to run against the guy because he's popular, so you get a judge to throw him out.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
And it's not America.
Yeah.
And they're doing the same thing to me. They're trying to make sure that nobody can vote for me, rather than having President Biden come out and say, "Here's why I think I should be a good president."
Yeah.
And here's why I think you shouldn't be. And let's have that discussion.
Yeah.
Not just say, you're not going to let me on the ballot. You're going to disenfranchise Americans so they can't talk to.
Yeah.
Any question?
Would you be RFK Jr.?
RFK, I don't know anything about him. Look, RFK is polling very low. He's not a serious candidate. They say he hurts Biden. I don't know who he hurts. He might hurt me. I don't know. But he has very low numbers, certainly not numbers that he can debate with. And he's got to get his numbers up a lot higher before he's credible. But the numbers that he's taken away, they say will be against Biden. I don't know. I'm not so sure. It could be a little bit against me, but I don't see him as a factor.
Well, Robert, one of the big issues for Democrats they've talked about is the threat to democracy. You raised some eyebrows yesterday when you were comparing the former president to the current president. You said in an interview that you believe that Joe Biden is a bigger threat to democracy than Donald Trump. This is what you have to say. Watch.
When people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy.
Why did you say that?
And by the way, I said I can make that argument, and I think it's an argument that we ought to be having. President Biden has done something that no other president in history has done, which is to order media, particularly the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Google, to censor his political opponents. And, I can say this because I just won a lawsuit in the Federal Court of Appeals, now before the Supreme Court, because he began censoring me 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to defend the Constitution. White House officials were on email with Facebook saying to them, you got to take down his posts. Facebook actually pushed back and saying there's no misinformation here. This is actually what he's saying is accurate. And they had to make up a new term called malinformation, which is information that is accurate but nonetheless inconvenient to, politically inconvenient. So there's been the First Amendment was put in the Constitution. Madison, Hamilton had it, said we put it, free expression, to guarantee the First Amendment, because all the other rights are dependent on it. If you have a president who can censor his political opponents, he has the license for any kind of atrocity. That is a genuine threat to our democracy. I think, what President Trump said about, about questioning the election and to the extent that he engaged in an effort to overthrow that, of course, that's a threat to democracy, but it is not the worst threat, undermining the First Amendment of our Constitution and then weaponizing the federal agencies to get his opponents off the ballot. And in my case, I'll just say particularly, denying me Secret Service protection. That's never happened in history.
You think he's behind that?
What?
Do you think Joe Biden is behind?
Of course he is.
Does he know that your dad was assassinated?
He has a bust of my father behind him at the Oval
So how does he
Office.
sleep at night?
Well, I don't know, but it's just not right. You know, all of these, the use of the courts, the use of prosecutors, the use of all these federal agencies to change our political landscape is wrong, and we should be debating about it. You know what President Biden did with his censorship project is he told the social media companies, we're going to withdraw, we're going to bring an antitrust case against you, and we're going to withdraw your Section 230 immunity, which is existential for those companies, if you don't give us a portal to censor. And then who did he give access to that portal? The CIA, the FBI, CISA, the IRS, NIH. So you had all these federal agencies that were now able to silence people who were questioning their policies, and that is really anti-American and anti-democratic.
RFK Jr. is, as you know, the most radical left candidate in the race. He's more so than the Green Party. He's more so than even crooked Joe Biden. But he's got some nice things about him. I happen to like him. Unfortunately, he is about the Green New scam because he believes in that, and a lot of people don't. They want to see our country become rich and wealthy and strong and powerful and lots of other things, and not waste money doing something that nobody wants and everybody knows doesn't work. I guess that would mean that RFK Jr. is going to be taking away votes from crooked Joe Biden, and he should, because he's actually better than Biden. He's much better than Biden. If I were a Democrat, I'd vote for RFK Jr. every single time over Biden, because he's frankly more in line with Democrats. RFK Jr.'s running mate, Nicole Shanahan, is also a very liberal person, but that's okay. She's got plenty of money from her ex-husband. Kennedy is a radical left Democrat and always will be, but he's a better man than Joe Biden, that I can tell you. It's great for MAGA. I hope he continues to run, but the communists will make it very hard on him to get on the ballot, as they did for him as a Democrat. He wanted to get on the ballot. They made it very, very difficult for him. They really went after him viciously, just like they go after me. Welcome to the crowd, RFK Jr. But the fact is that the Democrats are vicious, communist, fascists. They're horrible people. They really hurt him badly, what they did to him as a Democrat. That's why he's running as an independent. But expect him to be indicted any day now, probably for environmental fraud. He is crooked Joe Biden's political opponent, not mine. Biden can't speak. Biden can't debate. Biden can't put two sentences together. So I guess he's probably going to indict RFK Jr. But I'm glad that he's running. They will fight it out together. We have the right and we have the center, and we have even center a little bit left, if you can believe it or not, because that group is radical left. They want windmills. They want all sorts of things that are going to destroy our country, and we're not going to allow it. If you want to drive an all-electric car for a half an hour before you have to go home and get it charged, then you should vote for Joe Biden. But it's going to be interesting to watch the two of them fight it out. I do believe that RFK Jr. will do very well, and I do believe he's going to take a lot of votes away from crooked Joe Biden. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Hiller, and I'm the Director of Content at Team Kennedy. And today we're going to be talking about numbers.
Nerd alert!
All right, by now you probably know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running as an independent candidate for President of the United States. But you probably have heard him spoken about like this.
A spoiler candidate? A spoiler.
Spoiler.
Called Kennedy a spoiler. I'm a spoiler.
But is this really true? I mean, is Bobby really a spoiler in this election? We looked into it, and now we have the answers. Now, the preface here is that most polls are conducted by mainstream media outlets, and typically they have 1,000 to 3,000 or so respondents per poll. And most of those polls have about a plus or minus 3% margin of error. Well, we conducted a nationwide poll of over 25,000 respondents, and our margin of error was 0.6%. That makes it by far the most accurate predictor of the 2024 election that we have thus far. All right, let's dive into the maps. This is the head-to-head matchup between Biden and Trump. Trump with 294 and Biden with 244. Trump wins by 50 electoral votes. And if you're a political nerd like myself, you know that that is not very close. And with Bobby as a third-party candidate, Biden only picks up 2 additional states, so he still loses to Trump. All right, now here is where it gets very interesting. In a head-to-head matchup, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wins 367 electoral votes versus Joe Biden's 171. Now that is what we call a landslide. And what's even crazier about these numbers is when you look at the ad spend of these two campaigns. Biden has spent over $36 million in advertising since October 1st, and we have spent a little over $2. Now, the next head-to-head matchup that we pulled was Bobby versus Trump. Obviously, this is a very close election, but Bobby still wins. All right, so to recap, Biden cannot beat Trump in a head-to-head race, and it is not close. Biden cannot beat Trump in a 3-way race, and it's still not very close. Bobby wins in a landslide against Biden head-to-head, and Bobby beats Trump head-to-head. So wait, who is actually the spoiler here? Because a spoiler is a non-winning candidate whose presence on the ballot affects which candidate wins. A non-winning candidate affecting a possible winning candidate. So if you do not want to see Donald Trump become the next president of the United States, there is only one candidate running who has the power to beat him, and it is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Also, a Fox News poll came out a couple of days ago, and extraordinarily, the most popular major candidate right now, although he's for a third party, the We the People Party, is RFK Jr. Has an approval rating, rather a favorability rating of 47, followed by 2 points by the former president, and then Joe Biden is 6 points behind him.
Yes, and I would say, because I've looked at a lot of this swing state polling with RFK in particular, it's kind of a mixed bag. Sometimes he hurts Trump, sometimes he hurts Biden, but I would say for the most part he hurts Biden. But there's one line in the Wall Street Journal poll I'd be looking at, which is half of Republicans view RFK favorably, only a quarter of Democrats. This is why it is so smart for former President Trump to define him for what he is. RFK is a Democrat. You heard former President Trump say, look, he picked a Democrat. This guy, for all intents and purposes, is a Democrat. And next week, when Trump says he'll announce his abortion stance, he would be wise to contrast him. I'm the pro-life candidate. He is not. If you're a Republican, you need to be with me.
So that's suggesting that Donald Trump thinks that RFK would take voters from him.
Yes, he said MAGA welcomes him. So he was very clear on that. Yes.
All right, very good.
Would you become the vice president of the United States if Donald Trump asked you to be his vice president?
No, I would not. My marriage would not survive that.
All right, let's talk politics. A brand new Fox News poll finds that independent candidate RFK Jr. actually beats both Trump and Biden in favorability, as you can see the numbers right there. And their campaigns are reacting to the growing chance that he could actually change the course of the election of 2024.
That he has no path to victory. He is playing the role of spoiler candidate.
He's probably the most liberal person in the race, including the Green Party. I think he's probably going to hurt Biden. I don't see him hurting me.
We're going to start with Joe from Brookings, Oregon.
Joe, what's your question? Keep it tight.
Yes, would Mr. Kennedy be willing to do a one-on-one debate with Donald Trump, since we know Joe Biden's too senile to do it himself?
I would love nothing more than that. It would be great to have a 3-person debate, but I will debate either President Biden or President Trump in any kind of forum that they want.
Good luck with that. I don't even think they're going to debate each other, to be honest.
I think we're living at a time when the 2 least popular mainstream party candidates in the history of our country are running. Both of them would actually win the prize for the least popular candidate in the history of a major political party. 80% of the public says that they don't want a rematch of 2016. They want other choices. And, now it's a 3-man race as of today. People who support Donald Trump feel that they're regarded by the elites as deplorable people and that, they're not part of our country. And I think Donald Trump made them feel like they were part of our country.
Some of the tactics also pretty disgusting. We're hearing that the Biden legal team is throttling you guys by the throat. What's the truth?
You mean my campaign?
Yeah, I heard they're brutal.
I mean, we released a poll today. We did, Jesse, the biggest poll that's ever been done, and at least in this presidential campaign. A typical poll has 2,000 people in it. We did a poll of 26,000 people. The poll is a value of about $200,000 to $500,000. So we did every state. What that poll shows, if I go head-to-head with Biden, I win 39 states, he wins 11. If I go head-to-head with President Trump, I win. If I'm in a three-way race, I lose because people are voting out of fear because they think the other guy, a vote for me is gonna put somebody they hate in office. But if I go head-to-head with either of them, I win.
So if one of these guys drops out or doesn't run, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, RFK Jr. will be president.
That's right.
According to your polling.
Yeah, but, and all the polls that have done a two-way race have shown the same thing. I would challenge anybody. Our poll has virtually a zero margin of error. Anybody who does that poll will end up with the same results. I beat Biden in a landslide, and I beat President Trump narrowly in the Electoral College. And that's really what you want to look at, the Electoral College. But I win them. I beat them both in the general election and in the Electoral College.
Are you going to get on the debate stage with these two guys? And if you do, what's the strategy?
Well, there's no compulsory debate. President Trump has challenged President Biden to debate, which I think is a good thing. The debates are scheduled. There's 3 debates that are scheduled beginning on September 18th. I should have a spot in those debates because my polling up till now has beat those metrics. But you don't know because neither of them, the law allows them to not debate. It's never been done before. But
how would you do it? I mean, you got one guy over here, you got another guy over here, and what are you going to say? You're going to be like, hey, it's my turn.
I'm going to say, what were the two of you doing when you ran up $34 trillion debt? You two alone ran up half of it. We're now paying more than our defense budget to service that debt. Within 5 years, we'll be paying 50 cents out of every tax dollar to service the debt. And, that's one issue. And then they both, President Trump said he was going to end the wars. President Biden loves every war that he sees, but President Trump last week gave a bear hug to Biden and to Speaker Johnson and approved $61 billion to Ukraine. There's all these really existential issues that neither of them can really deal with. And one of those, Jesse, is the polarization. We are in a more toxic polarization and division than any time since the American Civil War. And President Biden can't solve it. President Trump can't solve it. If either of them get elected, it's just going to get worse because both of them feed on it. Both of them are telling all hate the other guy. And we need to have some common ground in America.
Well, you're saying you're going to unify the country. Now, some dirty stuff's coming out. They're saying you were against voter ID. RFK Jr., you said voter ID was racist. Is that true?
Maybe. I didn't see it. I had a lot of positions. I went through an evolution like many people in this country. And, I said things years ago. I had positions years ago that I look back on and say there was nothing good about that. I think what I've said on the voter ID issue is that I'm going to issue voter passports, passport IDs to every American who can't afford them. That will end that issue.
Okay, because you have to have voter ID to have a clean election. You got to have that.
And by the way, Al Sharpton and Andrew Young and other civil rights leaders have said that if I issue that ID, they will stop their objection to demanding voter ID at the voting booth.
All right, Al Sharpton, happy DEI Thursday tomorrow. RFK Jr., thanks for joining.
So thank you very much. This is 8 days that we've all been sitting in this courthouse. This is all a Biden indictment. It's in order to try and win an election, political opponent. And nothing like this has ever happened. 8 days. As you know, the economy's falling apart now. Now you're seeing it, very little growth. It's going to get worse. Oil prices are going up. You have the college campuses all over closed down. Our country is going to hell. And we sit here day after day after day, which is their plan. Because they think they might be able to eke out an election, but I doubt it because the poll numbers are very good for us. I just want to say that I've invited Biden to debate. He can do it anytime he wants, including tonight. I'm ready. Here we are. I invited him to the courthouse that he has us tied up in with his administration. This is all being done through Washington. It's all a well-coordinated attack on a political opponent. But I'm here. I'm ready, willing, and able. And if he wants, I'll do it on Monday night, Tuesday night, or Wednesday night. We'll be in Michigan, a state that he's destroyed because of the auto industry. We're not going to have any jobs left in Michigan. No auto jobs left in Michigan. They're all going over to China and other places with this ridiculous EV mandate, electric vehicle mandate. But we're willing to do it Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, or Friday night on national television. We're ready. Just tell me where. We'll do it in the White House. That would be very comfortable, actually. But you tell me where. But we're ready. He's obviously not showing up now. We heard nothing. But he said today that, I'd love to debate, but he won't debate. I don't think he'll debate. Maybe he will. Maybe he will. I'm not sure he has a choice. But that's the story. So here we are. We're ready, willing, and able. And we don't see him, and I don't think he'll be here. But maybe next week he'll do it. I doubt it, but maybe next week. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. I know you have to suffer through this like everybody else. Nothing has come. This is a case that should have never been brought. Every legal scholar, every legal expert, Andy McCarthy, Jonathan, Andy, every single one, Jonathan Turley came out with a scathing report on this trial today. Andy McCarthy's scathing report. Mark Levin can't believe this is happening in our country. There's no case here. There's no case whatsoever. It's a disgrace. We have a conflicted judge, and it shouldn't be happening. Not in this country. Thank you very much.
Do you think you beat Biden in a debate? If there was ever any time in the last 200 years that an independent candidate could win the presidency, it's now. Even the traditional mainstream media admits that 2/3 of Americans don't want to see a contest between President Trump and President Biden alone. My opponents are worried, which is why you're seeing so many dirty tricks attacks and condemnation of me by both President Biden and President Trump and the Republican and Democratic parties. Today, for the first time in American history, self-identified independents outnumber both Republican and Democratic voters. And independents favor me over President Biden or President Trump. I was particularly interested in a recent poll by NBC, which never gives me favorable treatment, but which acknowledged that 34% of Americans would consider voting for me. And in a three-way race, 34% is enough to win the election. Currently, polls show that about 20% of Americans have never heard of me and don't know that I'm running for president. So we have some work to do to get the word out about my campaign, but we also have a tremendous amount of headroom. Virtually everybody in our country knows that President Biden and President Trump are running, so they don't have much room to grow their supporters, and very few people are likely to change their minds about who among those two is the lesser of two evils. And keep in mind that when pollsters publish their surveys, they exclude those people who they consider unlikely voters. Based on historical records, they consider young people highly unlikely to vote. But what would happen if young people actually became excited about a candidate, as has happened in the past? They could provide a decisive margin of victory to my campaign. During the civil rights movement and the Vietnam era, young people who had never voted before in great numbers suddenly began voting in overwhelming numbers, and they changed the national debate. And guess what? Young people support me at a much higher margin, and they support either President Trump or President Biden. Young people are disgusted by the division. They're dismayed by the forever wars. They understand that they're not going to live the American dream, that they're not going to get their own homes, and they want somebody who's listening to them, and I'm that somebody. I'm going to end the forever wars, and I'm going to use the peace dividend to make sure that our young people get into homes and that they can have equity so that they can pursue their entrepreneurial impulses and rebuild America and small business in this country again. I can win the presidency, but I can't do it alone. I need your help. We have an FEC filing deadline on April 30th. That's very, very important to our campaign. Let's show the political establishment that Americans this time around are not going to be manipulated again by fear. They're going to vote for a candidate that they actually want to see as president. Please contribute to my campaign as much as you can. There is no more important time than now to donate.
When it comes to the regulatory capture, I think that even President Trump would admit at this point that he would have to do a much better job in his second term with regard to staffing.
But why do you give him a second term if he's messed it up so badly the first time? He said he was going to do that the first time. If I had been president, I would have done it. He was able, and even when he knew what was wrong, he said, well, I'll never lock down this country. But he got rolled by his bureaucrats.
I mean, I think that a lot of people who support President Trump, myself included, will believe that he got rolled by his own state.
Yeah,
and that's why 2020 was a disaster.
We need somebody in there who will not get rolled by their bureaucrats.
RFK Jr. is a Democrat plant, a radical left liberal who's been put in place in order to help crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States, get reelected. A lot of people think that Jr. is a conservative. He's not. He's more liberal than anybody running on the Democrat side. A vote for Jr. would essentially be a wasted protest vote that could swing either way, but would only swing against the Democrats if Republicans knew the true story about him. Jr. is totally anti-gun, an extreme environmentalist who makes the Green New scammers look very conservative by comparison. A big-time taxer, he wants to tax you. An open border advocate. He wants those borders to be wide open for more people to come in from prisons and mental institutions. And he's anti-military and he's anti-vet. He's an extreme liberal. He's radical left, and radicalized also are his family. They'll never allow him to be a Republican. They've said that we will not let him be a Republican. And his chief funder is the VP candidate that nobody ever heard of except her ex-husband, who's been stripped of a big chunk of his cash, and he knows exactly what she's all about. She's even more liberal than RFK Jr. She puts herself down as a businesswoman or maybe a doctor, and actually she probably is, because she did a hell of a big number on the husband. That's her business. I guess you could say that she's right, however, because what she's done is given a lot of money to the Democrat causes and the ultra-liberal causes. She's going to be a big hindrance, because when people saw that she was selected, they realized that Jr. was indeed a radical left. She's more liberal than Jr. by far, not a serious person, and only a pot of cash to help her get her no-chance candidate on the ballot is what got her there in the first place. I lived with RFK Jr. in New York and watched him convince Governor Cuomo to make environmental moves that were outright nasty and really bad for the state. We have the highest energy costs anywhere in the country, and that's because of RFK Jr. He was a disaster. Upstate New York was not allowed to drill or frack as Ohio, Pennsylvania, and others ripped off New York energy. Because of this, prices have skyrocketed all over that part of the country, and frankly, it's affected New England, it's affected everybody. But all of this was the policy of RFK Jr. He doesn't want any drilling whatsoever. He doesn't want anything. He wants everything to come to a halt, and you'd find that out. But the fact is, he is a radical left person. So Republicans, get it out of your mind that you're going to vote for this guy because he's conservative. He's not. And by the way, he said the other night that vaccines are fine. He said it on a show, a television show, that vaccines are fine. He's all for them. And that's what he said. And for those of you that want to vote because you think he's an anti-vaxxer, he's not really an anti-vaxxer. That's only his political moment. He said it the other night. He's okay with the vaccine. Their energy costs are the highest in the United States, in New York State and New England, because of this guy, with the exception of California and Gavin Newsom, who's the worst governor in the state's history and one of the worst governors in the history of our country. I'd even take Biden over Jr. because our country would last about a year or two longer than it would with Jr. It would collapse almost immediately, and his family, a radical left, a crazy left, a bunch of lunatics, would take over, and our country will die very quickly. So RFK's views on vaccines are fake, as is everything else about his candidacy. He is not a Republican, so don't think you're going to vote for him and feel good. He's a radical left Democrat. Let the Democrats have RFK Jr. They deserve him.
You're calling for a debate with President Trump. You have an open letter to him. I'll let you explain it.
Yeah, we're both, Eric, thanks for having me, first of all. We're both speaking at the Libertarian Convention in Washington, D.C. on May 24th and 25th. I've invited President Trump to debate. He's repeatedly said that he is willing to debate anytime, any place. He said that he specifically would debate me as long as my poll numbers are up. My numbers now in the latest Quinnipiac poll and the CNN poll exceed the 15% threshold. We also have just done the biggest poll of the campaign. Typical polls, Eric, are around 22,000 people, 1,200 to 2,000 people. Our poll was 26,000 people. It costs almost $200,000. The value of this poll, other people would charge $500,000 for it. It is so large that it has virtually a zero margin of error. And that poll shows, we did head-to-head races, and that poll shows that in a head-to-head race, I beat President Trump narrowly, and that I beat President Biden in a landslide. That the poll also shows that whether I'm in the race or I'm out of the race, President Biden cannot win the race. And in fact, President Trump wins 2 extra states if Maryland or Virginia and Maine, if I drop out of the race. But the poll shows me that the first time in history in head-to-head races, a third-party candidate beating the candidates of both political parties. And that's unprecedented.
Here you are, and you put this open letter out. Have you heard back from the Trump campaign?
We have not heard from him yet, but we hope to hear from him, and I hope to see him at the Libertarian Convention. The other news that we have is we got on the ballot in the state of Delaware. So we now have sufficient signatures for 11 states. We're getting 2 or 3 states a week, and we'll continue doing that until we have all 50. We will be on all 50 by July. And something that, again, has never been done with this many, a million signatures. We're going to get almost 2 million. We're going to get about double what we need to give us a big cushion, because the DNC and the RNC are both trying to throw us off the ballot because they don't want to have this contest. And then, the last piece of news is that we put out 2 days ago, we put the Super PAC, Kennedy American Values Super PAC, put out a 30-minute video called Who is Bobby Kennedy? It's narrated by Woody Harrelson. It's a very, very powerful video, and it already has 100 million views. Both Facebook and Instagram have been actively censoring the video. They've been removing it from people's platforms, and now they continue. Now we've called their attention and threatened litigation. They've allowed people to actually post it, but they are shadow banning it and slow walking it. So we're looking at our litigation options right now, but over 100 million people have now seen that video.
So I want to get to that in a second. It's a great video, by the way. I've watched it in full. Back to the debate, and we'll get the other. You sure you want to debate Donald Trump? I mean, there are stages littered with political careers everywhere in the aftermath of people wanting to debate Donald Trump. The guy's a master debater, without a question. You up for that? You ready for that?
I am, and I agree with you. I think President Trump is arguably, well, he's certainly the best debater in modern political history. I would say since my uncle. My uncle was also a very good debater, and who knows, what would have happened if my uncle had come across Donald Trump. I can't imagine it, but you could argue that he's the best debater since the Lincoln-Douglas debate. He's gone through, as you know, in 2016, he went through 16 opponents and, left them all in mayhem.
Here's a strategic question for you. So, let's say, small circle, President Trump is sitting there saying, eventually we're going to have to go through RFK. And we have to figure that out, because it's going to be challenging. The last RFK was an RP, right? And you know who RP was? Yeah. Ross Perot, right? And he had 19.5%, 21%, whatever the number was. And in George Bush Sr.'s documentary that was done, it's a great documentary, you got to watch it. The last 2 minutes of the documentary, the guy interviewing him asks a question about Ross Perot. It's the only thing he didn't want to answer. He got upset and walked away. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Highly recommend you watch it.
Yeah.
I think it's actually a very good documentary for you to watch to see exactly what happened with them, because I think that time's going to come as well. Let's say if you are chosen as a VP or whatever the role may be, let's say you are the VP. Do you think you could help, since you and RFK have a relationship together, to have RFK potentially, not necessarily, the better word would be to team up, because a lot of the values on what he likes, the left cannot stand him. Even the other day, a story came out, I think last week, talking about the Kennedy family is all behind Biden, kind of trying to undermine him. The fact that if your own family cannot support you, why would you support an RFK? They're dividing one of the most powerful Democratic last names, possibly the most powerful Democratic last name we've had the last 80 years, right? 100 years, that with Joseph and what he did. What role would you play if you were on the inside to be able to communicate with RFK?
I think that as this election season moves on, I'm not going to violate any privacy of the conversations that RFK and I have already had about what's going on in the country and how we share many of the same concerns about the direction our country is headed in. If it gets to that point where it appears that RFK's candidacy would help return Joe Biden to the White House, my hope would be that he would recognize that and shift course to make sure that that doesn't happen.
And you think you have enough of a relationship or influence for him to consider that?
We are good friends, but as you know, he is his own person.
Right.
So Just like every one of us, I have made a choice in my heart about what is at stake in this election. And as you'll see in the book, For Love of Country, this is what's motivating me. I'm going to be on the road for the rest of the year until the election is done. I'm not getting back to, I was home a few weeks ago and my mom asked when I was coming back, and I said, not until November 6th, because if I can have any impact and influence in sounding the alarm bells to those undecideds, to those disenfranchised Democrats, to those independents who may feel in their heart that things aren't right, but don't have, the intellectual ammunition or the facts or the resources or those shared experiences to help make that decision for them. I'm going to put everything that I have into this election because our country is at stake, and I hope and encourage everyone everywhere to do the same.
So, Rob, can you do me a favor and pull up the VP? Because I know it's a tough question for me to ask, and it's unfair for you to answer it because there's conversations that's been had privately, and you don't want to compromise that because later on it's going to come back, so I respect that.
I just respect relationships
totally get it.
and friendships.
I value that. For everyone out there that's watching, Tulsi is officially on Minect. Rob, if you can show her Minect, the first 50 people that Minect with Tulsi, we will send you a copy of the book as well signed. We bought copies to get it out there because we are so confident in her message being out there. We feel more people need to hear from her. So the first 50 that Minect with Tulsi, ask her whatever questions you got, and those 50 names we're going to send you a copy. Just make sure you're in America. If you're anywhere else outside of America, we're not shipping to you. If you're not in America, don't do the Minect. Only in America will ship the copy to your first 50 states. Thank you for that.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.
Many of the issues on which you disagree with President Biden have a lot of crossover with President Trump, who obviously is running on the other side of the aisle. So, you're in a strange position where Democrats are suggesting that you're a President Trump plant in order to take votes away from Biden. Some members of the Trump camp are claiming that you're a Biden plant in order to take away votes from President Trump. Why not support President Trump as an alternative to President Biden?
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I think that President Biden and President Trump are much more like each other than most people, and Democrats and Republicans like to acknowledge it. And let me say this, because that's going to be a controversial statement. I want to qualify it. I think President Trump and President Biden are very different in their temperaments, and extremely different. They're different in their professed ideologies. They're different in their personalities and their rhetoric. But the issues that they differ on are in a very, very narrow band. They're mainly culture war issues. They're abortion, it's guns, the border, woke ideology, those kind of transgender stuff. Some of them very, very important issues. The border is the only one that I would say is even vaguely existential. But the big issues at America that are existential to our country, that really threaten all of us, that are most concerned to all of us, neither of them has even taken positions on. The debt, for example, they're both equally bad on the debt. The debt is the most important issue. It's $34 trillion. The service on that debt is now larger than our defense budget, and our defense budget is larger than the next 10 defense budgets for the next 10 countries in the world all put together. So that is, and President Trump and President Biden are largely responsible individually for that debt. President Trump ran up the biggest debt in history. He put $8 trillion on that number. And that is more than all the presidents in 283 years of history before him. And President Biden put almost that much on it. So within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that is collected in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, and particularly if interest rates rise, within 10 years, 100% of every dollar collected in taxes will go to servicing the debt. This is really an existential crisis for our country, and you don't hear President Biden or President Trump ever talk about it.
You do seem at times to be warm towards President Trump, and he is clearly warm towards you. And
I would definitely disagree with that. He just called me a radical effing liberal.
But he also said you're a common sense guy, and you guys in public have exchanged warm words. I think that's fair. And you said you're proud that he likes you.
I've said good things about President Biden, too.
And Biden's fine.
He's been my friend.
But here's where I'm going with the Trump thing. You endorsed his opponent in 2016, correct?
Hillary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. What since 2016, in his first term, and then him refusing to leave office peacefully, and January 6th, and everything since then has made you warmer towards him? I mean, you went from supporting Hillary Clinton against him in 2016 to now, however you want to describe it, the way you talk about him now. Can you explain that for us?
Well, I can explain to you that I'm running against him, so obviously I don't want him to be president of the United States, and I don't think he did a good job. And if you go look at my speeches, my statements, I am not mean-spirited.
Sure, okay.
I don't try to feed into the vitriol and the anger and the polarization. I try to respect people. One, because of the office they held, the presidency of the United States. I always call President Trump President Trump. I call President Biden President Biden. I treat them civilly, but I criticize their policies. And I think President Trump's and President Biden's administrations have been catastrophic for this country. They've run up a $34 trillion debt.
Would you say roughly equally catastrophic?
I would say they're both been catastrophic.
But similar?
In their own way.
But similar?
In their own way.
Because here's why people...
You're trying to get me to quantify it so that you can win a debating point, and I'm not going to do that.
It's not a debating point. Hold on. It's not a debating point. There's a big choice coming down, and you are now inserting yourself, as you have the legal right to do, as a candidate for office.
Exactly.
But you're someone who, again, in all fairness, was giving these speeches against Nader for this kind of thing, was supporting Clinton against Trump, saying this is the danger of Trump. And now people hear you, and this is a chance to talk about it, but people hear you as very similarly to Nader saying it's a pox on both houses, lesser of two evils, what others call false equivalency. I want to play for you some of what Donald Trump... Wait, and then I'll let you respond, but I made this for you. This is some of what Donald Trump stands for and why people hear you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., talk about false equivalency.
This is all debating tricks. You're lighting...
There's not a trick at all.
You're lighting fires faster than I can put them out. Every single thing you say, I can answer. Give me a chance to answer.
Take a listen to this and you'll get the floor. Look at why people say, how can you say Biden and Trump are similarly catastrophic or both catastrophic, quote unquote? Take a look.
They were both catastrophic.
Both catastrophic, quote unquote.
Different ways.
Knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. I will pay for the legal fees, I promise. Very fine people on both sides. These aren't people. These are animals. Proud Boys, stand back and stand by the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country. I said I want to be a dictator for one day. It's nice to have a strong man running your country.
People are concerned not that this is Nader 2.0, but that you are using the platform and the following you have to suggest that they're both catastrophic and they're similar, and that you, they say, are ignoring not only the policy difference, but the actual possible democracy and autocratic threat of Donald Trump if he wins again. Perhaps thanks to you, your response.
Yeah, I never said that. So, like I said, I think both of them did bad things to our country. I think both of them contributed. President Trump, more than any president in history, built $8 trillion after coming in and promising the country that he was going to run the government like a business. He shut down every business, 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. That's a violation of the Constitution. He ran up an $8 trillion debt. More money he spent than every president between George Washington and George W. Bush, 283 years. President Biden is racing to catch up with him. He's added $1 trillion in the last 100 days. We're now spending more for our national debt, our $34 trillion debt, and we are on a defense budget. Just to service that debt, within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%. It's not sustainable. They're both catastrophic. Neither of them can solve that problem. Let me tell you something else they can't do. Neither of them can end the vitriol that you are trying to pump up right now. I understand.
What have I said that's vitriolic?
What
have I said that's vitriolic?
You're saying to me that I need to take a side and say one person.
No, I'm asking you about, you're running for president, it's a big job, and I'm asking you about what people say out there.
You told me I would have the floor. You told me.
Yes, I did.
After you get
but you
your
just said,
long
you just
speech.
suggested that I am perpetrating vitriol, and I asked you to substantiate that. What have I said today that is vitriolic?
Let me finish what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I said when I announced a year ago is that we are facing a time in our history, Harry, that is more, and I think you'll agree with this, you are a student of history, that is more vitriolic, more polarized, more poisonous than at any time since the American Civil War. And it's all being amplified by the social media algorithms. And it's hard to see a way out of that. If somebody doesn't come along and say, I'm not going to participate in that. And even if people act crazy on both sides, I'm not going to be part of that craziness. I'm going to try to talk about the issues that people care about. In fact, the fact that 57% of Americans can't put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. That cohort, if the engine light comes on in their car, it's the apocalypse. There's more than half of our countrymen. And these two presidents have created that situation. More than 50% of the people in this country are making $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs.
Well,
and we're embroiled in forever wars.
So when you
mentioned neither of these guys can get us out of. I think President Trump is arguably, well, he's certainly the best debater in modern political history. I would say since my uncle. My uncle was also a very good debater, and who knows, what would have happened if my uncle had come across Donald Trump. I can't imagine it, but you could argue that he's the best debater since the Lincoln-Douglas debate. He's gone through, as you know, in 2016, he went through 16 opponents and, left them all in mayhem.
There are now 2 debates between you and President Biden, but if RFK Jr. qualifies to be on that stage, will you still participate?
Well, I have no problem with him. I think he's really not doing well in the polls at all. His numbers have gone down a lot lately, but I would have no problem if he got whatever the threshold is. But he's very low, and he seems to be heading in the other direction, in the wrong direction. I would have no problem with it, though. If he qualified, I would have no problem.
You're calling for a debate with President Trump. You have an open letter to him. I'll let you explain it.
We're both speaking at the Libertarian Convention in Washington, D.C. on May 24th and 25th. I've invited President Trump to debate. He's repeatedly said that he is willing to debate anytime, any place. He said that he specifically would debate me as long as my poll numbers are up.
You sure you want to debate Donald Trump? I mean, there are stages littered with political careers everywhere in the aftermath of people wanting to debate Donald Trump. The guy's a master debater without a question. You up for that? You ready for that?
I don't underestimate President Trump, but I think I'm uniquely able to confront him on issues that nobody has confronted him on. He has now been 4 years in the presidency, and I want to talk to him about his record. I want to talk to him about why he locked down 3.3 million businesses, shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the American workers and the middle class to this new oligarchy
I would love to see
billionaires.
Now, I would love to see this debate.
This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir?
Presidential candidate RFK Jr. joins me now. What do you think happened down there in Lower Manhattan today?
I think, Jesse, that it is going to backfire. This conviction is going to backfire on the Democrats. I think every time that President Trump has been indicted that his approval ratings actually increase, his popularity increases. I think there's a large number of Americans who are going to see this as the politicization of and the weaponization of the enforcement agencies. And I think it's going to hurt. It's bad for our democracy. I think the Democrats feel like they have, the DNC feels like it has a candidate that cannot win fair and square in the polls. And so they have to win in the courts. They have to win by clearing the deck and getting their other opponents out of the race. I'm not a fan of President Trump's, but I want to win. I want to beat him in a campaign on a level playing field. I want to talk about his issues, about locking down the economy, shutting down 3.3 million businesses, about running up a $34 trillion debt, about engaging us in forever wars and doing favors for Wall Street. I don't want to beat him in a courtroom. I think it's not good for our country, and I think it's really going to backfire on the Democrats.
Well, I think maybe you have a little bit more honor than the sitting president, that's for sure. Your uncle was the head of the DOJ and then eventually was ensnared in similar vicious, elite, and very dangerous circles, your father and your uncle. Do you see any similarities with what is going on now today?
Well, my father was the Attorney General. You know, his first week in office, he called up in 1961, he called in all the division heads and the bureau chiefs of the Department of Justice, and he said, rule number one, politics is out the window. We never prosecute based upon politics. We never ask whether somebody's Democrat or Republican. The reason he did that was because he understood how important it is for our country, the American people, to have faith that the judicial system is neutral, that all of us need to respect it. If we start believing that it's politicized, it's terrible for our country. And that's one of the reasons prosecutors, even when there's a case against a former president, like there was with President Nixon and many, many others, that they usually err on the side of caution, of not bringing it, because we risk making ourselves look like a third world country, like a banana republic, where nobody really actually runs the election. If there's somebody who's going to run against you, you get rid of them one way or another. And and this was part of our history in England when when the king was running it, he'd choose his prime minister and his parliament members, and people who ran against them, he would lock them up. So this was a sensitivity that we had from the beginning, that we need to be very, very careful about separation of powers.
Well, RFK Jr., you know why that they're getting away with it is because the media lets them. If we had a fair press in the United States, they wouldn't even be tempted to pull these stunts. They wouldn't be trying to incarcerate their rivals and indict people for threatening their power. It's the media that's letting them get away with it because they're just not held accountable in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jesse. I think there's tribalism in the media, and a lot of them have forgotten what journalism is. A lot of them have forgotten about what integrity is. And we see this across the board. But what I would say to people is, in the Democratic Party is, even if you won this way, what is it going to do to our country? If half the people in this country have the anger and the rage and feel like that they're the person, they're a champion, that the candidate that they wanted to vote for has been taken off the table. When I was growing up, the Democratic Party was the party of getting everybody to vote, of making sure nobody got disenfranchised. The modern Democratic Party is just trying to get rid of as many possibilities for voters as possible, and it's not a good thing for our country.
It's changed. The party's changed, the country's changing, and it's happening in a wild, wild fashion. RFK Jr., thank you so much.
For more than 150 years, the NRA has been defined by men and women like all of you, loyal, hardworking citizens who believe in defending your families and your communities and our country. RFK Jr., I call him Junior. By the way, he's radical left. Don't think about it. Don't waste your vote. We need a conservative person with common sense. This guy is radical left who destroyed New York. They're taking down all of the energy components. We have the highest, and all of New England, actually. He's a disaster. He's radical left. RFK Jr. is radical left. It reminds me of this fly that's driving me crazy up here. This fly is brutal. I don't like flies. But RFK Jr. calls you a terrorist group. You know, he calls you a terrorist group. Can't vote for him. You can't, you know. Somebody said, well, they like his policy on vaccine. The other day he said, no, he'll go for the vaccine. He's got no policy on anything. He's radical left. He always has been. His family is angry at him because he's doing this. They won't talk to him because they said, where the hell did this come from? And for some reason, he's getting probably a little bit more. Hurting Biden a little bit more. But we can't waste any votes. We have to make sure we win. And I'm meeting, I don't know if you read, but I'm meeting next week, very soon, with the Libertarians, because largely they have so much of what we have. You know, they're also people of common sense, generally speaking. They have a couple of things that are a little different, but we have to join with them because they get their 3% every year, no matter who's running. And we have to get that 3% because we can't take a chance on Joe Biden winning. He's the worst president in the history of our country by far. We can't have it. But RFK Jr. says bad things. He calls you a terrorist group, and I call you the backbone of America. That's a big difference, wouldn't you say?
I'm not going to take anybody's guns away. My father was killed by guns. My uncle was killed by guns. I understand how generationally that gun violence can harm societies or communities. I also understand there's more in this country and it's intolerable. School shootings are unacceptable. Mass shootings are unacceptable. We're having them every 21 hours, and that is unacceptable. Is it because of the proliferation of guns? The evidence indicates otherwise. And let me explain this. The proportion of guns per home in this country has not increased. I think it's increased by a little less than 1% since 1970. And yet the mass shootings have proliferated beyond, started since then, and now, you know, they're everywhere. There are other countries that have comparable numbers of guns. Switzerland, for example, the last mass shooting in Switzerland was 21 years ago. We're having mass shootings every 21 hours. Why is that? It can't be just because of the guns. It has to be something else. I've made a suggestion that we begin studying the other possible covariables. And this is what NIH should be doing. NIH should be studying, are video games contributing to that? There's social media, are the isolation, the alienation that people, could it have something to do with the proliferation of psychiatric drugs, particularly SSRIs?
But your position is that you have a view of the facts, or you believe empirically that limiting gun access wouldn't solve the problem, and therefore you don't want to limit gun access. I guess even before we go into all the comparative studies, what is the great concern? Is it a legal or constitutional concern? I mean, what is the great harm of trying to limit some of the gun access?
Well, you know, right now we're in a part of history, as I said, where we're more polarized than ever. You know, I grew up in Virginia. I spent 2 years living in rural Alabama, another year living in rural South Dakota, and I understand that there are large communities in this country and cultures in this country that feel a cultural attachment to their guns. They see that it's part of the Constitution.
So for you, it's partly how people feel about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I should mention many countries that have tighter gun access have far lower fatalities, have almost no mass shootings. And the United States has 4 times Switzerland per capita.
Okay,
we have more guns, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, Harry. You know, if we talk sort of non-politically here, something happened that, you know, around the time of Columbine, where these mass shootings started happening. There's never been a time when I was a kid, we had gun clubs in our schools. People brought their guns. Kids brought 22 rifles to school. They weren't walking into classrooms and shooting people. Something changed. There has never been a time in human history where people walked into crowds of strangers and started killing them. Oh, you can't blame it completely on guns because the gun, you know, at the time the mass shootings increased, there was no coterminous increase in gun ownership. It has to be something else beside that. Clearly, the enormous number of guns we have in this country contributes to gun violence. But if we cut the guns, would it end the gun violence? First of all, I don't think, you know, particularly with the very expansionist interpretation of the Second Amendment that the Supreme Court has given, there's very little room.
That's certainly the legal reality.
We do it on the margins, and that's not going to change anything. But what it will do is it will increase the insecurity, the anger, the distrust, the suspicion of those people who feel very strongly about that issue. Yeah. And so for me, it does not seem like I've made the commitment. I'm not going to take people's guns.
I'm skeptical of the Democratic Party. I'm skeptical of the historical establishment wing of the Republican Party. I know you all heard from RFK Jr. earlier today. And I'm just going to be calling it out like I see it across the board, 360 degrees here. I respect his commitment to medical freedom, something that many of you in this room share as well. I will first acknowledge that. Got to respect somebody who stands for actual medical freedom. But RFK Jr. is in no sense a libertarian in any meaningful sense of the word. I mean, the fact is, you cannot say you support free speech in this country if you also have, even in the past, advocating for imprisoning those who have spread climate disinformation. The Second Amendment is not a recommendation, it is a right. And I'm going to say this, call it like it is. I'm proud to be not only the only Republican candidate who came to PorcFest this year, but also to be the only presidential candidate of any party that did not require people to disabuse themselves of their Second Amendment rights in order to enter those grounds either. And I don't think that you're a libertarian if you behave like the other side. I'm glad he's skeptical of the government narrative on vaccines, but he's completely imbibing the government narrative on climate change. I'm glad that he supports actual medical independence, but the fact of the matter is somebody cannot oppose nuclear energy in this country and support an expansion of the regulatory state on grounds of environmentalism or consumer protection and in any way pose as a libertarian. It's just a fact of the matter. So I don't really bend the knee to one particular political party or another. Democrat Party, Republican Party. I respect some elements of what everybody has to say in respecting freedom, but RFK is in no sense a libertarian either.
Well, let me ask you, there's another block that's there that's on all 50 state ballots, so that's the Libertarian Party. Now, they recently had a chance to hear from Donald Trump. You might have heard that one. That one got pretty nasty. I want you to respond to this.
If you want to win, if you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years. Now I think you should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
All right, it was a pretty nasty reception. I don't know how they react to you. I know there are many who are saying it's an easy way for you to get in all 50 states, but you're not exactly the classic definition of a libertarian. So what do you do?
Well, I spoke to the libertarians the night before, and I got a standing ovation from them. You know, the libertarians, I'm very aligned with libertarians on several issues, on the war issues, anti-war, on the constitutional issues, on personal freedoms, those areas, and on free market capitalism. So on those areas, I'm aligned with libertarians. There's other issues like the abolition of Social Security and Medicare in which, you know, I differ from them.
Apparently, it was the Social Security thing
so-
that knocked you off their list. But Donald Trump does have a point to say, unless they, put their arms around somebody, they are going to get 2 or 3% every 4 years. So what good is that? What do you think of that?
Well, that's up to the libertarians. I mean, I'm polling now pretty consistently in the real polls where they ask the polling question the way it's going to end up on the ballot. I'm polling at 15% or above. We're very happy where we are right now. I have 5 months and 4 days to persuade Americans that they should be voting out of hope and inspiration rather than out of fear. My favorability rating is better than either President Biden or President Trump. I'm beating them consistently in young people in this country, and I'm beating them among independent voters who are today the biggest voting cohort today. Neil, for the first time in history, independent, self-identified independents outnumber both Democrats and Republicans. 43% identify as independents, only 27% Democrats, 27% Republicans. So in that cohort, I dominate. Our challenge is getting to the baby boomers. And, at this point, the television networks won't let me on except for Fox. But the major networks will not let me on to do a live interview like you're doing right now. And I think that is the big obstacle to us. And if we can break down that barrier, we're pretty confident that we'll do well with the baby boomers as well.
Former Trump policy aide Steve Miller, also Trump campaign surrogate, dear friend. Steve, look, this is not personal. I know Robert Kennedy Jr., and he's a very gracious person, not personal. But on the issues, I want to begin with this. He has a long history of being a real climate extremist, it seems to me. And I think that's a big problem. And I think under the Biden administration, I don't know whether there's much difference between the two. We've seen how this has damaged the economy, oil prices, gasoline prices, business expenses. What do you make of all that?
Well, you're right. RFK Jr. is a climate extremist, has been for many years. His climate extremism is well documented and well known. He would shut down all fossil fuels. He would abolish drilling, and he would put significant taxes on carbon emissions that would crush the economy. I think what's significant, Larry, and what you're really talking about today is this. He is indeed a serious candidate. He is a serious candidate of the left. The American voters will go to the polls, and they'll be able to choose from 2 liberal Democrat politicians, RFK and Biden. Some Democrat voters might like RFK's climate extremism and vote for him. And so you have 2 extremely liberal candidates in Biden and RFK running. By the way, it's not just climate extremism. RFK has been very extreme on the Second Amendment in favor of gun confiscation. He's been very extreme in favor of socialist economic and tax and regulatory policies. He's been very extreme even recently, saying that he favors abortion up through the end of pregnancy in all 50 states. So again, a very, very far left position there. So on issue after issue, he staked out territory that puts him to the leftmost portion of the American electorate.
I'm reading from Karl Rove's column on this. Karl's pretty tough on him. Again, this is not personal. He's a very gracious man. But Karl says Kennedy has a lot of other, quote-unquote, moonbat ideas. Agribusiness is waging war on our health through the food pyramid. The 2004 election was stolen. The 2004 election was stolen. Wi-Fi and 5G cause cancer. Sirhan didn't kill RFK Sr. He also talks about reparations for black descendants or cities. He doesn't mention any specific names. So, again, these are pretty far out stuff. These are pretty far left. Actually, they're just fringe kinds of issues. Those don't really seem serious to me.
Well, another one that was not included on that list is his very, very strong sympathy for the Palestinians that support Hamas. So that's another issue where he fits in very well with the left flank of the Democrat Party. I think there's a lot of, for example, Arab voters in Michigan who don't like Biden and who will be voting for RFK. I think there's a lot of college students in places like New Hampshire who are very anti-Israel, who will be very comfortable voting for RFK. So there's a large portion of Biden's coalition that will actually be much more comfortable, whether it be on climate issues or foreign policy issues, voting for RFK. So this is squarely a problem as and more people become familiar with his record. And so as a lot of it was in Mr. Rowe's column, a lot of what we've discussed today, I think it's going to be a real scare for Democrats in November.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of reparations, I've never understood how you get there. It was hundreds of years ago. Times have changed. We don't live in Jim Crow anymore. Joe Biden makes the same
reparations
case.
Is unpopular across the board.
I know.
As a policy matter.
You get Gavin Newsom in California talking about reparations. You're talking about hundreds of billions, maybe over trillions of dollars that nobody has. Doesn't make any sense to me. And again, he's a very nice fella. He's a very gracious man. I've known him for a long time. We had dinner together with a bunch of people maybe a month or two ago. But politically, you're right. He is a man of the left.
Fundamentally, he's a liberal, socialist, Democrat, and more people are becoming familiar with his record.
Thank you, Steve Miller. Appreciate it, buddy. See you soon.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
And I want to go to a report by the Wall Street Journal. They reported yesterday that Trump and Elon are in regular communication. There were rumors today that Elon's advising Trump on crypto, which Elon refuted. And Trump has floated the prospect of giving Elon some sort of advisory role at the White House. What do you make of this, and would you consider Elon for a similar role?
I already get advice from Elon. So, I value his advice. I think he has a unique perspective. I have an enormous admiration for him. He's been the leader in our country for standing up for free speech. He told me one time, he said that, he said, I'm from South Africa. I was born in South Africa, but this is my country. He said, I don't own any property out of this country. He said, all my properties, all my factories are here in the United States. And I've made a commitment to this country. And he talked about the reason for that was because of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our free speech. He stood up for free speech despite it costing him tens of billions of dollars. Nobody else has made that kind of sacrifice since the American Revolution for free speech. And so, I have, Elon's got issues like everybody else, but at his core, I see somebody who's really heroic. Do I worry that he's advising President Trump from, my own personal political point of view? No, I don't. I think it's a good thing. I think the more people who are committed to freedom and values that President Trump takes advice from, or President Biden, if he was advising President Biden, I'd applaud that too.
Trump has left the building.
We can now project the winner of the presidential race. Donald Trump wins the presidency. What started off as unlikely, impossible, is now reality.
I will fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down.
We have a president who actually fulfilled the promises he made during the campaign, securing the border to foreign policy.
He now has a record as president that's pretty damn impressive.
Breaking news out of Palm
The
Beach,
FBI
Florida.
has executed an unprecedented search warrant at President Donald Trump's
Against a
Mar-a-Lago estate. The former president has both sides of the political aisle up
Is
in
a
arms.
dangerous and unstable moment in American history.
The Justice Department has just indicted former President Donald Trump.
For 7 years, they hated him, they targeted him, they hunted him.
This is the epitome of the abuse of the prosecutorial power to preempt political decisions.
I never thought anything like this could happen in America. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. The more that a broken system tells you that you're wrong, the more certain you should be that you must keep pushing ahead. They want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. They're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way, and I will never be moving. On November 5th, 2024, justice will be done. We will take back our country, and we will make America great again. America will always rise to every challenge and overcome every danger.
Donald Trump seems to always get stronger when challenged. These types of things, I think, give him strength.
When I'm reelected, I will totally obliterate the deep state.
As long as we have pride in our beliefs, courage in our convictions, and faith in our God, then we will not fail.
Donald Trump has said more about you. He's zinged you a few times. You don't tend to zing back, and I just wonder why.
I said when I announced my candidacy a year ago that I'm not going to feed into the vitriol and the anger. We have this toxic polarization in our country that to me is more toxic than at any time since the American Civil War. And I think we have to figure out what I said. I'm going to try to identify the values that Americans hold in common rather than focus on mainly these culture war issues that keep us all apart, that are orchestrated to make us hate each other. And I think somebody has to try to bridge the gap between Americans, and that's what I've been trying to do with my campaign. So, I criticized President Trump for his policies, for running up the debt, for getting us in wars, for shutting the country down during COVID, for being friendly to all these big corporations and billionaires. And I don't go after him on personal issues. I try not to talk about his court cases, and I do the same thing with President Biden. No. Let's talk about issues. Let's talk about them in a respectful, congenial way, and then let people decide on that basis rather than trying to make us all hate each other. I believe 2024 is going to go down in history as the year an independent candidate wins the presidency. Let me tell you why I think that, because you definitely won't hear about it from the mainstream media. Zogby Strategies recently conducted the most comprehensive and accurate poll of this election, surveying over 26,000 people. That's about 10 times what the typical poll surveys, and it has a margin of error of almost zero. They asked some questions that no one has asked so far. Zogby asked who people would choose in a head-to-head matchup, not just between President Biden and President Trump, but with Kennedy versus Biden and Kennedy versus Trump. Results were shocking to the mainstream media, which is probably why you haven't heard of them. When I go head-to-head with President Biden, I win in a landslide, 367 electoral votes to a mere 171. When I go head-to-head with President Trump, I still win, but in a nail-biter, 270 to 268. And when they face off against each other, President Trump wins by a comfortable margin of 50, whether I'm in the race or not. Frankly, the biggest obstacle to my victory is that people think I can't win. This poll shows that I can, and that's why it's so important to spread the word about these results. They shouldn't be surprising, really. Independents now outnumber Democrats and Republicans by a margin of almost 2-1, and my favorability rating is higher than either of the other candidates. That's why I'm asking for your help today, to turn my winning chances into a winning reality. Please give whatever you can to my campaign. Help me take our country back from the corrupt two-party system that has turned our country into ruin. The election is only months away. Please give me your support now. Thank you, and God bless you.
Hey everybody, my name is Jonathan Hiller and I'm the Director of Content at Team Kennedy, and today we're going to be talking about something that might just be the worst example of voter suppression in our democracy today. And you may not have heard of it. It's extreme restrictions to ballot access. In George Washington's farewell address, America's first and only independent president warned that the rise of political parties would eventually subvert the power of the people. And unfortunately, today, the extreme ballot access laws in our country prove the enduring truth of Washington's words. But let's back up a little bit. So typically, when you go into a voting booth, you see two options, a Democrat and a Republican. But every now and then, you'll see another option. It might be the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or an independent.
Live or die, survive or perish. From this day on, I am with my country.
Bobby is running for president to break the two-party system for good and unify the country. And to do that, he needs to get on the ballot as an independent. And to do that, he needs to get signatures. A lot of them. In fact, we need to gather over 1.5 million signatures throughout the country to make sure that he's on the ballot in every state and the District of Columbia. The amount of signatures that Trump and Biden need is 0. But we're totally fine with that because Team Kennedy has now gathered enough signatures to qualify Bobby for over 200 electoral votes. Recently, Bobby and Nicole turned in over 245,000 signatures to gain ballot access in Texas, which accounts for 40 electoral votes. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s move to independence has been the most successful in over 30 years. But for shits and giggles, let's observe just how ridiculous this is.
Oh, girl, baby girl.
The weight of the ballot access form needs to be just right in Massachusetts. The petition sheet in Michigan has margins that are so narrow that you have to have them professionally printed. Some states like double-sided, some states like single. And be sure you use the correct color ink and paper, because that's all different too. And in states like Washington, you need to post legal ads at least 10 days before you start petitioning. Also, the range of signatures that you need from state to state are kind of crazy. I mean, it goes from 275 in some states to 219,000 in others. So when it comes down to it, ballot access is all about power. It's the major way that the duopoly tries to make sure that you only have two choices in November. But despite the establishment's efforts to keep Bobby off the ballot, we have hundreds of thousands of volunteers out there gathering signatures all over the country for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will be on the 2024 presidential ballot.
He has met ballot qualifications in yet another state.
Here in Michigan,
In Iowa.
In North Carolina.
in Arizona and Georgia,
Texas. California. New York.
Utah.
in Nebraska.
Over 40% of registered voters have now also declared their independence from the two-party system. And thanks to our incredible volunteers and staff, Bobby will be an independent choice for every registered voter in this country in 2024.
I know you filed this complaint with the Federal Elections Commission. What do you think is behind this decision? Do you think it's driven by the Biden camp, the Trump camp, both camps, CNN? What?
The rules are that networks can sponsor debates, but they cannot pre-select. They have to use pre-selected criteria in order to decide who gets to participate in those debates, and it has to be objective, neutral criteria. And what happened, according to the people who participated in that conversation, as reported by the Washington Post, is that the Biden administration said to CNN, you need to select rules that will keep Robert Kennedy off the stage, or we're not going to participate. If you have criteria that you design to garner two candidates, then that's an illegal, and to exclude everybody else, and that is an illegal campaign contribution to those candidates. And so we've written a complaint to FEC asking them to enforce the rules. We talked with CNN, and CNN was very cagey about exactly what happened in that conversation. We asked them, did you pre-select? Did you select it in response? Did you select your criteria in response to what the Biden administration asked you to do? And they said, we can't answer that question because it's privilege. Well, there is no privilege that applies to that conversation. So they were being dishonest about that.
Do you think that there's one candidate that's more against you being there, obviously because they think you're going to hurt their chances more?
Both candidates wanted me off the stage, but since the announcement, President Trump has come out publicly and said that he would welcome me on the stage, as long as I meet the criteria, which I do. The President Biden's staff has said they do not want me on the stage and that they will not participate if I am on the stage. So I would say the answer to that question is that President Biden doesn't want me on. The polls, the best polls, show that I take many more votes away from President Trump than I do from President Biden. So, when we poll our own followers, about 57% of them say that if I'm not in the race, that they're going to support President Trump. If I'm in the race with President Trump and President Biden, President Trump wins. If I get out of the race, President Trump wins larger. He actually gets 2 more states, Virginia and Maine. If in a head-to-head race between me and President Trump, I beat President Trump. President Biden cannot beat President Trump. I can. In a head-to-head race between me and President Biden, I win 39 states. He only wins 11.